Welcome to this YouTube video for the November 2022 case study exam. My name's Kieran Doe. I'm a senior tutor at ACA Masters. When I sat the case study exam myself, I won the ICAW prize for the highest score in the world. Several of my students have also won ICAW prizes for their performance in the case study exam. During this class, I'll be working through requirement 1 from our first November 2022 mock exam, and I'll be teaching you exactly how you should interpret the requirement, the way you should structure your report, and the type of points you should include in your answer. The class is taken from our November 2022 case study video course, and I'll be referring to our materials for the November 2022 case study exam. Further details for all of these can be found on the ACA Masters website, and if you head over to the case study page, you will find further details on the video course that we have available for November 2022, and also our mock exams, pro forma report, and AI analysis. Free samples are available both for the video course and for the mock exams. So if you'd like any further details on any of those resources, please head over to the case study page on the ACA Masters website. So if we look at requirement 1, we can see that requirement 1 wanted a review of WWL's performance for the year. So year ended 30th of September 22 in comparison with the previous year, just as we would expect, and as is always the case in requirement 1. Your review should be based on the management accounts as set out in Exhibit 17. It should incorporate the additional information in Exhibit 16 and include appropriate recommendations for improving the business. It should cover. So as usual, we've got the management accounts, and it looks as though we've got some narrative to go with those, which will give us the reasons why certain things have gone up or down. Then we're told specifically what to focus on, and this is very important that we read this part very carefully. Revenue for each client type individually, each product type individually, and in total. So they want revenue in total, but then also for each client type and each product type. Gross profit for each client type individually and in total. Operating profit in total. You should also respond to the request for advice. So you can see in this requirement 1, we've got an additional piece of analysis to undertake as well. So we can see where we need to focus on the management accounts, revenue, gross profit, and operating profit, as we would expect. But then we've also got a one-off piece of analysis. Now, it's really important, as is always the case, to focus very carefully on the requirement wording, because that will determine the boxes on the marking key and therefore which sections we should have in our report. Because we need to answer the question. The examiner is going to give marks for answering the specific requirement they've asked for, not the requirement you may have hoped would come up. So focus very carefully in revenue, gross profit, operating profit, and the one-off piece of analysis. And we need to do revenue for each client type, each product type, and gross profit, of course, for each client type. We can't analyze that by product type, even though we know there are different margins and markups for different products. So it's worth spending some time at the start just thinking about what the marking key is likely to look like, because that will help you determine how much you're going to have in each section. We already would have thought out, and as we have in our pro forma report, what our revenue section is broadly going to look like. Cost of sales and gross profit as well, operating profit as well. And then if we've got an additional piece of analysis, possibly ethics as well. So we need to think quite carefully about how much we're going to have for each section. Clearly, we're going to have revenue, gross profit, and operating profit. But we've also got the additional piece of analysis as well. Now, it's really important, as explained in the How to Ace the ACA case study video classes, that you do not overrun on requirement one. Lots of students overrun on requirement one, and it probably is the biggest cause of failure in the case study exam. So it's really important we stick to time on requirement one so that we have enough time for requirement two and requirement three. Because of course we need to pass each requirement individually. So we want to make sure that we pass all of the boxes and do everything the examiner requires us to do to pass. But of course, you don't want to spend too much time. And as explained, on this pro forma report, we have covered every eventuality here because, of course, we have overall revenue, then we've got each of the different client types, mix by client type, and then all of the different product types as well, and then mix by product type. So you can see there's about 10 different sections here, subsections, mini paragraphs on revenue, which of course is going to be too much if revenue's only 2 boxes. So therefore we're going to need to think quite carefully about which points we would include. So that's why we need to think first of all about how many boxes are there likely to be for revenue. Similarly with cost of sales and gross profit, we could do each cost line by line, and cost of sales overall, that's 4, and we could do gross profit margin, overall gross profit, and then by a client type. But again, if gross profit is only 2 boxes, that's going to be too much. We're going to kind of overkill a bit there. So then, again, with operating profit, it's probably only really kind of 3 points there. So probably less chance of us kind of overrunning on operating profit, but we need to do the additional analysis as well. So therefore, it's worth spending some time just at the start of the question, looking at the requirement, thinking what this is likely to look like on the marking key. Because, of course, we know this left-hand column and this right-hand column will be the same. We've got our conclusions and recommendations, the appendix, nicely laid out with all the correct numbers that we have been asked for. Then some of the basic numbers which can be in the appendix and in the context. So we know that those boxes will be the same. So we're really just kind of thinking about what are these boxes here likely to look like. So then, if you think, well, we know we've got revenue, and revenue will always be worth at least 2. It could possibly be worth 4, and that has been the case in previous exams. But, for now, we think, okay, we'll have these 2 top boxes for revenue, as is always the case. We've been asked to analyze revenue. That's definitely going to be the case that those 2 are for revenue. And then it's kind of these 4, because we need to think, okay, well, what else have we been asked to do? Well, we've been asked to do gross profit and operating profit, but there's also an additional request for advice here, at the end. So that is almost always worth 2 boxes. So we think, well, we've got 2 boxes for that. So therefore that leaves 2 boxes for gross profit and operating profit, and they're effectively going to have to share a box. So you can see that those points would kind of be in there together. And that kind of makes sense because as well with operating profit, as I said, there isn't that much to do for operating profit. There's the selling and distribution costs, the admin costs, and then, of course, operating profit itself. So really, I think you kind of struggle to come up with more than 3 points for operating profit. So therefore, it's unlikely to have a box all by itself, and therefore it kind of makes sense that it's kind of put in with gross profit. So therefore, we know we're kind of really looking for, a maximum of kind of 5 points for gross profit and operating profit. So therefore, we definitely don't want to kind of include, all of these points because, as I said, that's too much. That's definitely going to be overkill there. And with revenue as well, that's only kind of 2 boxes there as well. So having all of this is going to be too much. Remember that once you get 4 points in a box, you get the highest mark. There is no more to be achieved by having more points than 4. So kind of 4 is almost like the magic number, really. More isn't better. In fact, more is worse, because if you spend additional time getting these points, you're not getting any credit for them. So effectively, it's the same as just having a point which is incorrect, because you're spending time putting a point down and you're not getting any credit for it. Which is quite frustrating, but that really kind of emphasizes the need for balance here. So that's why it's worth spending that time at the start of the question, just thinking, what is this likely to look like at the marking key? So you can think about how much you should have for each section. And if it just asks you for revenue and the request for advice, then you think, well, the request for advice is 2, so therefore revenue must be 4. Or if it just asks you for revenue, gross profit, and operating profit, then there might be an argument that gross profit and operating profit would be this bottom box, and revenue there could be 4. Or if you had gross profit in its own box, and as we said, operating profit is unlikely to be its own box. Now, another indicator of how much to allocate as well to each section would be the type of information that we're given in the exam paper as well. So if we're given lots of information, perhaps on revenue, that could indicate it would be worth more. But the standard is for it to be worth 2 boxes. That's the usual. And when we've got the request for advice and you have to do profit as well, then that's quite clear that this is how the marking key would be laid out. So spend that little bit of time at the start, just so you kind of know how much you're looking to include for each section, and then we can start thinking about how we would structure our points in the exam. So there's different ways that you could approach it, but personally, and as I've explained before in the exam technique videos, I prefer to do my revenue section first. So that includes analysing the numbers and doing the plan and writing revenue up, and then moving down and then doing gross profit, and then doing operating profit, and then looking at the request for advice. But you may decide to do all the numbers first of all. It is personal preference. So whichever method works best for you. So then start working through the numbers. So we've obviously got the overall revenue number. Now we've got all of our 2021 numbers in our AI analysis document. So you may decide you want to start by kind of copying those over and getting your pro forma appendix 1 laid out. We know we're doing revenue kind of by client and by product. So you may decide you want to put all of the 2021 numbers in first of all, and the mix, and you could have your kind of formulas put in for mix, and then you could kind of drag those across, but then you could put in your 2022 numbers. So we'd have revenue, and then we've got it, of course, in the note by client type and by product type. So then we would have those numbers going in, and then we can work out the change and the percentage change. And then I quite like to just kind of step back and have a look and see what has gone on in the year. Obviously, prior to the exam, there's been a lot of kind of anticipation and speculation about what actually will happen, and you would be wondering yourself a lot, is retail going to go up? Is it going to kind of stay flat? Is Bespoke going to keep doing well, or will there be a downturn? So it's quite interesting to just kind of step back and look, well, what actually happened in the end. And now we've got the actual numbers, and you can see actually it's been a very good year. All of the client types have gone up. Bespoke clearly here has done particularly well, but the other two have done well as well, particularly because retail was flat previously. And then maybe just do a quick sense check of your mix numbers. Of course, if Bespoke's gone up by the most, or if any of them have gone up by the most, then of course revenue mix would be shifting towards that one that's seen the biggest increase, and that's of course what we can see there. Slight decline for the other two, less so for commercial, of course, because that went up more than retail. And then we can look at it by product type as well. And we can see here, not much of a movement there on the main product type, the 80-20 mix, but you can see a big increase in rugs, less so in wool, but still an increase. And those two, of course, are tied to Bespoke. We'd expect if Bespoke does well, then these two would do well. And depending on the information in the exam paper, we might be able to do some additional analysis on that. And then, of course, PP, looks as though it's had spectacular growth, but of course, that's starting from a very low base because that was 3 months of the trial period, and now this, of course, would be a full year. So expect that number to be really high, but of course, see that in the context of it is starting from a very low base. So not necessarily so much it's had a spectacular performance, just that it's really starting from a very low base. It's a 3-month period effectively in there, and this is, of course, would be a full year. More meaningful, perhaps, to look at this compared to the prediction. And that's what we've got, of course, in our pro forma report. And then maybe just do another sense check of your, mixed numbers, just to, make sure you haven't got a formula which is out or something like that, and just kind of sense check maybe some of the overall numbers as well, just to make sure, like I said, that you haven't got like a formula error or something hasn't dragged across correctly. So then we can see what the numbers are for the whole year, and we can see which ones are more significant in numerical terms and financially. So then we could, we know that we've got kind of several different points we could have for revenue. So we know that we only really want about 5 overall, absolute minimum of 4, 5 or 6, I would say, kind of as a maximum in terms of our mini paragraph. So we know we're not going to comment on everything. So what we need to think about is which ones have had the most significant movement. We're definitely going to cover all of the different client types, but in terms of the product types, maybe we'll focus on the ones which have had the most significant movement. And of course, we want to focus on ones where we're given a reason in the exam paper why it's gone up or down. So of course, we're going to have some narrative with the accounts as well. And we have this here, a note from the FD. So additional information on the draft management accounts. So we've got revenue section here, and we've got a bit more on bespoke design, and we've got costs further down. So the first quarter was our busiest ever. So it's first quarter with a record number of orders from retailers. So that's clearly going to be a reason why retail revenue has gone up. So you might want to start putting these in on your pro forma report now. We're definitely going to comment on overall revenue. We're definitely going to comment on it by client type. So retail, commercial, bespoke. And then in terms of having, an additional point, possibly 2, we're going to need to decide on, are we going to say something about mix, or shall we focus on a few of the product types? And if the requirements ask for to have some analysis by product type, we'll probably focus on a few of these. But again, we'll decide which ones had the most significant movement and ones where there's information in the exam paper as to why they've gone up or down. But we can see the first point here is all about retail revenue. So therefore, you get your retail revenue. We're going to say, whether it's gone up or down with the number. And then we've got our reason here. So always trying to get a reason from the exam paper. We want to use that information the examiner's given us as much as possible. The examiner wants to see us absorb and react and, analyze that information. So that would be our reason, and you could scribble this on with a pen. The reason why retail revenue's gone up, so maybe just put, busy or record Q1, something like that. So you've got your plan there. So that point is definitely going to go there. And then, of course, we're always going to try and look to a further analysis point and then give a context point, but they won't necessarily come from the exam paper. So that's the first piece of information we're given here. So by the end of December, so obviously the first quarter would be October, November, December. So by the end of December, so by the end of the year, we had no remaining inventory for several products. It was that much of a busy period, so perhaps busier than expected. Fortunately, this did not cause an issue because retail demand gradually slowed throughout the rest of the year, giving us time to replenish inventories. Okay, so it sounds as though the busy first quarter, but then growth slowed. And of course, there was this mention in the AI, and as you probably know yourselves, a bit of a general slowdown in the UK economy. So that could be the reason there. So we've got our reason for that, and then possibly we could have that as our context point. We could possibly mention economic uncertainties perhaps in our context point. So we've got our next point here. So in February 22, we conducted a price review for all our products. The board took the decision to increase the price per metre square for all products from the 1st of April 22. The average price increase was 5.2%. So we can see here there's a price review for all products. There was an increase in the price per metre square for all products on this day. The average price increase was that. So, I mean, that's going to explain why revenue would have gone up, well, for all of them, really, if there's been a price increase per metre square for all products. So we could possibly use that, with commercial, we could use it as bespoke, we could possibly even put that in with, overall revenue if it affects, because it affects all of them. Or we could have it possibly, with some of our products. So sales to commercial clients increased in the 3rd and 4th quarters as companies refurbished offices following a return to office working. So commercial clients, revenue from them increased in the 3rd and 4th quarters. And then we've got our reason here, refurbish of offices. So therefore we could have that, you could scribble that on. So commercial, that's our reason there why commercial has gone up. And then we've kind of got this separate subsection here on bespoke. So we received 65 orders from bespoke design work during the year. This included 2 luxury hotels placing orders of 520k and 360k in the 2nd quarter. So 65 orders, and we can see from these order sizes. So if you think back to our AI analysis, we of course had the details of all of the different orders, 51 orders in total, and we knew kind of what the values were. So those 2 large orders, which were kind of 250k each, those were the biggest orders. So we can see here that, these are, well, individually, they are the largest orders here. So kind of record orders in terms of individual orders, and also more orders as well than the previous year. So it's due to volume and it's due to order value as well. So both like a price increase and a volume increase. In order to satisfy the client's requests, we agreed that payment would be made 90 days after installation. Both projects were ongoing at the year end. So we can see that payment terms 90 days after installation. So the projects started in the 2nd quarter. The payment's going to be made after installation, and they're both ongoing at the year end. So you'd think and it would have had an adverse impact on liquidity. There'll probably be some inventories, maybe some kind of work in progress building there if they haven't already started to fit them. So we'd have some work in progress there if they're still being made. And if payment's going to be after installation, they haven't been installed and no payment has been received. So you'd expect that to have a negative impact on cash, but we're looking at revenue here. And like we've said, we've got number of orders have gone up, high values. So that would be, of course, kind of our reason there for bespoke. So we've got a reason there coming, of course, from the order numbers, which is something, probably quite likely or quite likely we'll see in the exam. But that was kind of a bit of a mention of cash there, and then there was a bit of slowdown about inventories there. So maybe the request for advice might be cash related, because otherwise we seem to be given a lot of information about things that impact cash, and we don't know what the request for advice is yet. You may have decided to have a quick skim through it. Personally, I just leave it to when I get to it. So then we've got 2 orders of 250k were received from clients who have used WWL previously. So it sounds as though that might be those previous large order clients who had ordered every year, even though it wasn't a recurring contract or anything like that. So we're told 4 orders of between 200 and 300k, so 4 other kind of large orders were received from new clients. All other revenue was from small and medium-sized orders. So I think this is just kind of reinforcing that point that there's more large orders here. You can see, 4 orders. I mean, these are all like large orders, 4, 6, 8 large orders. So that's obviously clearly bigger than the previous year. So yeah, I think there's different ways you could explain this. You could say there's more large orders. There's more orders altogether, and of those orders, more are large. And there's also a few record number of orders here as well. So hopefully there'd be a few different points you could make there to get the marks. But that's definitely a reason there as to why Bespoke has gone up. And then we're told even more information about Bespoke. So revenue from sales of 80/20 wool products to bespoke design clients accounted for 14% of total revenue. Revenue from sales of 100% wool carpet to bespoke design clients accounted for 8% of total revenue. Revenue from sale of rugs to bespoke design clients accounted for 6% of revenue. So you can see we've kind of got that breakdown of bespoke revenue by product type, something, of course, we were also given in the AI. So we can analyze bespoke design work by product type. And we could, of course, compare that to what we saw previously. So therefore, we've got some more numbers. We can do some analysis here. And this is kind of a classic sort of thing I'm saying here when look for a further analysis point. Can you do some more analysis of the numbers? We could have done some more analysis of these numbers with the order numbers, but we've also got this as well. So we want to try and use everything and also be quite efficient with our time as well. So of course, we know what total revenue is because we get that from the management accounts. So we're told that so we're told here in the exam paper, so revenue from sales of 80/20 products accounted for 14% of total revenue. So 80/20 wool products sold to bespoke design clients, the value for that is 14% of total revenue. So we've got total revenue. If we take 14%, we can see that of bespoke revenue, how much was 80/20 mixed products. And then we can do the same thing for wool. So sales of 100% wool to bespoke design clients accounted for 8% of total WWL revenue. So let's take 8% of that revenue. That tells us how much 100% wool to bespoke design clients. And then we can do the same for rug, we're told 6%. And therefore you can see you'd get to the total for bespoke revenue. But of course, now we've got the breakdown by product mix. And that's something, of course, we could do in the AI and something we did, of course, in the AI analysis class. So then we can see, of bespoke revenue, how it's broken down by product. Now we know, for the business as a whole, the vast majority is 80/20 mix. There's only going to kind of 10% and 9% for woolen rugs, and a small amount for PP. No sales of PP to bespoke design clients, which makes sense because they prefer the more luxurious products. This is more kind of a budget range, a lower quality product. So then we can kind of really look at this 2 ways. You can look at bespoke revenue and kind of see what its product mix is. And you can see that 50% of bespoke revenue is of 80/20 products. 28.6% is wool, 100% wool, and 21.4% is rugs. So you can see, and as we would expect, and as we saw in the AI, when you look at bespoke revenue, actually only 50% of it is of 80/20, and half of it is of these more luxurious products. So you can see that it's quite different from the overall business, and as you would expect, because bespoke clients prefer these more expensive, more luxurious products, the wool and the rugs. And of course, you could look at it the other way as well and say, well, if you look at these product types, how much of their revenue is going to bespoke clients. So rather than looking at bespoke revenue and breaking it down, you could look at these product types and break their revenue down. And you can see that actually wool, so total 100% wool sales are 1942. And we know that 1463 are to bespoke design clients. And you can see that 75% of 100% wool sales are to bespoke design clients. You can see like this product is heavily dependent on bespoke work. Yeah, and kind of vice versa as well. And again, with rugs, million of rugs sold to bespoke design clients of a total sales of rugs of 1672. So again, you can see that rugs, the sale of wool and rugs is heavily dependent on bespoke design. And of course, we saw that in the AI, and we had those did that previous analysis, and of course we have that there, so we can compare it to the prior year. So that's definitely something I'd be looking to do when analysing bespoke. If you're given that effectively updated information of what bespoke's sales were by product. So then, we definitely have this in our further analysis. There's different ways we could cut this, but of course, if we're looking to include something by product type as well, this is kind of a good opportunity to almost kind of like intertwine like analysis of 100% wool and rugs, because you can kind of actually include that analysis when you do your bespoke paragraph. So that kind of saves a bit of time, but also kind of covers these off as well, because we were asked to do it by product type. So we could say, for examples, as I said, there's different ways you can look at it. We could say that how much of bespoke revenue is for wool and how much is for rugs, and explain that they're both higher margin products. Or we could say like the increase in bespoke has caused an X% increase in wool revenue and an X% increase in rugs revenue. I think we'll definitely want to do that, because then we're including what the year-on-year increase is in wool and in rugs, and that's what the requirement did ask for, to look at the year-on-year movement, revenue overall, client type, and product type. So that would be doing it by product type. So you can kind of see we're doing like a further analysis of bespoke while also kind of doing the movements for those two products as well. And then, as I said, you could say how much of bespoke was for these two products, or you could say, how much, of these two products is for bespoke. So kind of looking at that mirror opposite, if you like, or just looking at it the other way around, as we have said here in our, as we've got here in our analysis. So definitely a bit more to do there on bespoke. But we can see how we're going to use this information. There's a lot of information on bespoke design here, and then it comes on to costs. And like I said, if I've gone through the revenue section, I've kind of planned out my revenue section. I've looked at the numbers. At the moment, all that's kind of going through my head is revenue, number, reasons, a further insight I'm going to include. I'm kind of ready to just write up my revenue section. You could, as I said, you could then go on and plan your cost section and do your cost numbers and then do your profit, but you're going to have to come back to revenue. So I kind of quite like doing things when they're still fresh in my head. So if I've got my revenue section planned and I'm kind of, ready to write it, then I just like to do it now, while I've kind of got all these thoughts of, bespoke product mix and things like that all in my head. So that would kind of be our kind of 4 points. I mean, you could also do mix. You could do mix by client type. Well, we've done 2 of the products here. I mean, you could possibly do the others. I mean, there isn't really much to say on 80/20. I know it's the biggest one. The move isn't that significant. It's just kind of almost like the standard product, really. The move isn't that significant. We're not told the movement's not that significant, and we're not told anything in the exam paper about it. So they're the things I kind of look for when I'm thinking, which numbers do I want to comment on? Well, I look at the numbers which have had the most significant movement. So which ones have had the most significant kind of increase, decrease in the year, or if there's a reason from the exam paper as to why they've gone up or down, then I'm of course, that golden rule, trying to use the exam paper information as much as possible. Of course, there's a justification that it is like one of the most significant numbers in total. It is the most significant product type because it's the biggest. So you could possibly include it for that. PP is quite interesting to look at as well. So, I mean, these are definitely the four I would do. And then you could probably kind of choose one from the others. If you really want, you could do two. But as I said, you need to make sure we finish this on time. We don't want to kind of overdo it, spend too long on our revenue section and have a knock-on impact on the rest of our report. So quite cleverly brought like woolen rugs into that. So that's kind of good. We've got those off. And then you could have, one additional one to include as well. So then we could start typing up our revenue section. You may want to do these four for now and then come back and decide which other one you want to do. But we've got, overall revenue, whether it's gone up or down. Use the absolute number. I like doing that for the current year for things like revenue, gross profit, operating profit, cash, those big headline numbers. But for the others, you can just do the increase, the absolute increase in the percentage. And then definitely comment on whether it's above or below the KPI and the target. So that would be the first thing to do. So you can see that here in the model answer. Start typing up overall revenue. So it's gone up to this. And as soon as you see that, you'll think, have they met the target or not? No, they haven't. As soon as you see the growth number, you can think, have they met the KPI or not? Yes, they have. So it's above the KPI of 4%, but below the target of 20.5 million. And then I would say, whether it's a good performance or a poor performance in the market, which we know is estimated to grow at an average of 2%, unless we're told something else in the exam paper, like an updated growth figure. So that is a good performance in the market. Now, we want to have a context point in there so we can say about the economic slowdown or the cost of living crisis. So that may have had a negative impact. And then you should always compare the growth to the previous year growth. And you can kind of tie those 2 points in together, or you can kind of have them separate there. And then we'd also want a point about COVID in there as well. So COVID probably now is more of a historical issue for most businesses, and certainly probably seems to be like the case here, but it is having an impact on the results because the 2021 growth was high, but that's because the 2022 figures were low because of the impact of COVID. So we could mention that 2021 growth was artificially high because we've compared it to the prior year growth. So we've said about the economic slowdown and the cost of living crisis may have had a negative impact. And we've said that the rate of growth is decreasing. So you can see growth is lower than the previous year. But don't forget that the 2021 growth was almost artificially high because the 2020 numbers were lower because of COVID. And then you should look to see whether all client types and all product types have seen an increase or a decrease. If there's any kind of like trend there that everything's going up or everything's going down, that's useful to look at and then have a point there. And we could see in our analysis that actually it was going up. Revenue for all product types has gone up. Revenue for all client types have gone up. So that's another good point to have there in overall revenue. So of course you can see overall revenue is a bit different from when we're looking at it, by client type or by product type, because here that's where we have, the number with the reason from the exam paper, like a further insight point and a context point, and we do that for each. With overall revenue, you don't go into the reasons, why each client type's gone up or down, because we're going to do that there. So we're kind of looking at just like the overall picture. So we're saying whether it's gone up, but importantly, looking at have they met targets and the KPIs, how it compares to the previous year, how it compares to the market estimate, and then have a point in there about COVID as well. And is there like any overall kind of trend here? So everything's going up or everything is going down. And then we can come on to the individual channels. Like I said, retail, we've already got that from our plan. So we've got the number, absolute percentage, reason from the exam paper, so that record Q1 and the price increase. So just lifted those from the exam paper. There are reason there. Always trying to use that exam paper information as much as possible, but we obviously had that there in our plan. Then always try to look for like a further insight point. So you could say for retail, growth continues to be low or flat. Obviously, that isn't true here. So obviously, some of the points we've got here, only include them if they actually apply. Don't just copy this out. These are examples of points to consider including, depending on if they're relevant. So obviously, growth hasn't continued to be flat, has it? Because growth is 5.7%. But you could say growth has improved, or it's still below the 2019 level would be another point there, and then a context point. And then we just do the same for each of them. You can see what we're doing every time. So like commercial, number up or down, with the reason. So office refurbishments, again, reason from the exam paper, kind of further insight point, and then a context point. So it's low margin due to price competition, but the higher volumes would result in production and distribution efficiency. So it might have a lower gross profit margin, but maybe when you get down to operating profit, that picks up a bit, that margin improves. And of course, with Bespoke, so again, Bespoke has gone up. So I mean, every time we're saying increase, but impressively, reasonably, incredibly, perhaps here with so try and give some opinion. I think that's quite incredible, 17.3% growth. I was probably running out of words a little bit there, which is primarily due, and of course we've got the reason from the exam paper. So they've got the revenue from the two new clients, which individually both exceeded the largest order in 2021. And then we can do that further analysis where we could say what percentage of Bespoke revenue was for wool and what percentage of Bespoke revenue for rugs. And both of these are higher margin products. So that's like a further insight point there. I think it would probably not necessarily easier to think of one here for retail and commercial, but almost like a better one, being able to do some more analysis of the numbers that the examiners have given us. Maybe here is a little bit clutching at straws, trying to think of one. But here there clearly was one we could have, and you don't need them for all of them. But this was definitely, the examiners have given us some more numbers here. This is definitely something I want to be using as much as possible in my answer. And then, as I said, we could say the increase in Bespoke revenue caused the increase of 5.8% in 100% wool products and the increase of 42.3% in rugs revenue. So therefore, we've actually got the movement by a few of the product types here because we've kind of tied it in with our Bespoke revenue analysis. And then we're saying here that Bespoke accounts for this percentage of wool and this percentage of rugs, showing that these products are dependent on Bespoke work. So if there's a downturn in Bespoke work, it would cause a downturn, of course, in those two product groups. And of course, the opposite is true, as we've seen in this year, an upturn in Bespoke work is in an upturn in those two product groups. And then I decided to do PP. Like I said, you could have done mix. You could have done mix by client type, or if you thought that actually I want to make sure that I want to have everything in there. So I've done it in analysis by client type, and I want to make sure that I have every product type in there as well. You could have done mix for the product types, as well, alternatively. So I think, having your fifth point was kind of up to you to decide. I mean, I think you could probably say, well, there wasn't a reason in the exam paper for PP and it's quite small. So, maybe I could see why you might think that, I shouldn't have had that one in there. But I thought what's quite interesting here is, of course, we know what the year one forecast is. And I know this isn't because obviously there were the 3 months in the previous year. There were 3 months in the previous year, and now we've got a full kind of 12 months here. So we're kind of outside of that first 12 months. But if you kind of look here, you'd expect that to be at least at the level of the 12 months forecast, the year one forecast. And we can see it's below that. So the forecast appears optimistic. And, as that's expected to make a loss, actually selling volumes below what was expected would, should result in the loss being lower. Of course, we knew that from the AI. So that's a point there you could have on PP. But like I said, you could have done mix by product type. You could have done even mix by client type. So same exam technique that I've demonstrated several times before, just applying it here to WWL. So if we think about what we're trying to achieve here by using this approach, like I said, with our different sections here. So like I said, with retail, we're saying number, reason, further insight point, context point. What we're trying to do here is get that mark there for retail, nice and easy, that one, picking up the mark there for the number. Sorry, we did overall revenue first. So maybe if we look at overall first, we've got overall revenue. So this is what it's gone up by, above the KPI and below the target. Good performance compared to the market estimate. Slowdown in cost of living, compared it to the previous year artificially high, all clients have seen an increase. So you can see here that we get overall revenue, and you actually get that for the number being in the appendix. So that's been given that mark in that box. And then you can see our further analysis points. We've compared the growth to the previous year. We've said it's below the target. We did the KPI as well. We just need one of these because it's a backslash. And we said there's an increase in all product types. So you can kind of see here that should pick us up a few marks here. And then we've got a context point in there about the industry estimate. And we mentioned COVID as well. So actually it picked up a lot of marks there, but the overall revenue section was quite big. So then we get on to our individual channels. And as I was starting to explain, number, reason, further insight point, context point, and you can see what we're trying to do every time. So retail, the number, trying to get a reason, and you can see here Q1, all the increase in the price per meter square, and they've got the office refurbs as well. So they've actually got retail and commercial together in this box, which sometimes can be a bit frustrating. But we've got retail, kind of reason, and then we're looking for a context point. You can see I had a further insight point as well, and they just weren't on the marking key. So like I said, not so much I thought they were bad points, but they didn't seem kind of really interesting thing to say, or really irrelevant. Mentioned the property market actually as a context point. That was on there, but that's kind of backslashed with this point, so it doesn't actually really get us any more marks. You can see I actually mentioned cost of living as well. So you can see that, already got that point for mentioning COVID. And then commercial, same thing. So, number, reason, again, unfortunately, backslash with a point I've already got. And then I had a further insight point, which wasn't on there. And the context point I mentioned for retail wasn't on there as well. So you can see why you don't always need to get them down, certainly for perhaps maybe the less significant ones, but always trying to get some points in that box. And then Bespoke, we did the same thing, number, reason. So let's have a look. Obviously the number, that's kind of like the easy bit. Bespoke, got the number here. Of course, you only need one of them. Bespoke, number. So the reason I said like more orders. And then I did some further analysis where I looked at the analysis by product type, etc., the impact on wool and rugs. And you can see here, this is just all kind of backslash there with that. So again, maybe a bit disappointing. It was all kind of 1 point. But again, you can see, have done really well here. And then we did PP. So that actually ended up being in this box, probably because there just wasn't any more room in here. We compared it to the predicted revenue and said the predictions were too optimistic as well. So we had the number there for PP. So there we are. So that's our revenue section. And of course, in our bespoke analysis, we had the numbers for 80/20 and the numbers for wool. So you can kind of see here, comfortably past 5 points in each box, clearly competent, with a mark to spare. So kind of just what we're looking for. And you can see, as I said, we could have put more in there, could have done 80/20, but you can see, what I mean, if we had done that, there's no need. So I think 80/20 in the bespoke analysis, it was wool and rugs. So we didn't get the 80/20 point, but didn't need it because already got maximum marks. It would have been a waste of time putting that down in there. You could even probably argue even doing PP was a waste of time. In fact, even just with those first 4 points, but I like to have 5 just kind of in case. to give me a bit of headroom. But you can see, you could go on and on and on with this revenue analysis and just spend, so much time on it and not actually getting any more marks, even if what you've got is really good analysis. So you want to kind of get through your revenue section quickly. You want to get into it, get through it, grab the marks you need, and then get on to your next section and make sure that we get a good spread of marks across all the boxes. It's no good getting 6 here and having lots of empty boxes elsewhere. Better just get kind of 4 here, and then kind of get 3 and 4 on all of the others. Get that spread is really important. So then we can move on and look at cost of sales, and then do our numbers for cost of sales, and just approach this in the same way, really. So we could look at cost of sales and gross profit together. So we've got cost of sales, we've got our numbers here. We've got the gross profit numbers. We've obviously got all the prior year numbers, as well as some kind of reminders of the types of things which have caused them to go up or down in the previous year. But we're following exactly the same technique. So put your prior year numbers in, put the current year numbers in, work out the changes there. So we've got the kind of movements here in the absolute numbers. We can look at the percentage of revenue and how that's changed. Gross profit, interesting to look at, particularly the margins, really important to focus there. So again, I would probably, like to step back and think, okay, what's the big picture here with the numbers? Well, materials have gone up significantly. And there has been a big volume increase, isn't there? Revenues went up by 8.9%. Materials have actually gone up more than that. So that kind of erode the profit margin. But actually, these costs have been, what looks to be well controlled. Of course, we know from the AI that there are some fixed costs in there. And then as a percentage of revenue, as you would expect, of course, materials have gone up because the cost has increased by more than the increase in revenue. So as a percentage of revenue, of course, it will have gone up. These two should have gone down because they've increased less than revenue, which is what we can see. And actually, if you look at cost of sales or percentage of revenue, you can work out what the gross profit margin is when we would do it ourselves. But obviously, 100% minus that would give us our gross profit margin. So gross profit margin has increased. And we can see that there. So there we are. The gross profit margin there has increased. You can see just from that number that it would be 32.8, and it would be it was 31.2 in the previous year. And then we can do the gross profit margin by each client type. You can see it's dropped slightly for retail, gone up slightly for commercial, and Bespoke is in a big jump. And Bespoke was already the highest margin product. So again, we've said that this is worth a box or 2 boxes, but with operating profit as well. So we're going to want 1 or 2 points on operating profit. So we're probably only really looking for 3 kind of maximum 4 points of cost and sales and gross profit. So again, materials has seen a big jump. So let's see, it's the biggest number to begin with. It's the biggest part of cost of sales, and it's seen a big increase. So we're going to want to comment on that. Maybe these two not so much, unless we're given a reason in the exam paper as to why they've gone up. Definitely we're going to comment on the headline gross profit number, because of course that impacts the bonus and it's a KPI. And then we'll look at some of the gross profit margins by each client type as well, but we don't want to spend too long on it. So again, we probably need to kind of restrict ourselves a bit here and be a bit strategic about what points we're going to include. So if we look at the exam paper information and what we're told, we were told that, so with costs, so this could be cost of sales, it could also be admin and selling and distribution. So Peter Haycroft, the CEO of Eaton Yarns Limited, contacted us in January 22 to explain that they would be increasing prices. So this is a supplier, of course, of wool yarn. So we've been told they're increasing prices for wool-based yarn with immediate effect. So that was in January. So that price increase would have taken place during the year. He cited increasing wool prices, higher transport costs, and adverse FX movements are reasons for the increase. He also explained that WWL had been exceeding Eaton's normal payment terms, so credit would be reduced going forward. So again, this is something which is having an impact on cash. So that's going to cause cash to have gone down, or certainly you'd expect payables to have gone down, and therefore that would have a negative impact on cash. And we also talked about production staff given a pay rise. So clearly this is a reason why materials of course have gone up. So I'm absolutely going to comment on that. Materials, up with the reason because the supplier put the prices up. Could look at it as a percentage of revenue. Could have a context points. We're told in the AI that wool prices are erratic and they're recovering now from their drop in 2020. And we could also mention that being reliant on a single supplier increases risk and supplier power. Of course, if that's their only supplier, there's nothing they can really do at this point about that price increase. So I probably will comment on labour now because I've given a reason in the exam paper as to why it's gone up, and so I'll do labour and materials, and then as you said, we'll definitely look at gross profit as well. So maybe I'll have that for my kind of 3 points, and then when we say why gross profit has gone up, we try to kind of intertwine a few of the individual client type gross profits as well. So there's usually a mark for looking at whether cost of sales have increased faster or slower than revenue. Now, overall cost of sales have increased slower than revenue, and therefore that have a positive impact on the gross profit margin. So we've mentioned the overall cost of sales number there. But then, as I said, we can do materials and labour just as we did for revenue. So number up with the reason from the exam paper. And then you can look at this as a percentage of revenue, quite an interesting further analysis point, and then a couple of context points as well. I thought I could think of a few good context points there, so I brought a couple in there, but maybe just have one of them if you're struggling for time. Whichever one feels most relevant. I guess they're both kind of quite relevant here. So then labour. So labour's gone up by 1.8%. Due to the pay rise, it's now this percentage of revenue, so it's actually fallen. And then a good point here would be that there's a fixed element to these costs, and that contributes to operating gearing, and this will reduce profitability and liquidity in a downturn. So, of course, if they're fixed costs, we've kind of seen the advantage of having fixed costs here, because if you've got fixed costs, then when revenue goes up, costs will broadly stay the same. So revenue's gone up, costs have stayed the same, and that'll improve the profit margin. You can see they're reducing as a percentage of revenue. But of course, if the opposite were to occur and revenue, volumes were to fall, revenue was to fall, then these costs would stay the same. Whereas, if volume falls, they sell less, there'll be less materials as well. That'll be more of a variable cost, whereas this will be more of a fixed cost, or it certainly has a fixed element to it. So then when we look at overall gross profit, now, as I've said in the preparatory classes, looking at the margin is generally much more interesting because, the overall gross profit margin, the overall gross profit number, if revenue's gone up, you'd expect that to go up as well. So therefore, when you look at the margin, you can kind of see that the margin's actually improving. Is the percentage of that revenue they're turning into profit going up? But actually, absolute gross profit is quite interesting to look at here because it's a KPI, and of course it impacts the bonus threshold. So therefore we could say here that overall gross profit is increased, which is above the KPI and the bonus threshold of 250k. So therefore I think it's definitely worth looking at the overall gross profit there. And then we can come on and look at the margin. So when we're looking at the margin, we can see that has the gross profit margin gone up or down? It's gone up. Now, there could be lots of reasons. There's lots of factors which affect the gross profit margin. So you want to try and pick them all out, or certainly pick up the ones which are most relevant. So the sorts of things to look at here are whether all cost of sales lines are decreasing as a percentage of revenue. I mean, we said here cost of sales overall is decreasing as a percentage of revenue. I mean, you could possibly kind of put that point in there as well. Whether there's been a gross profit margin increase in all of the client types. So again, looking at that kind of big picture, if the gross profit margin has increased in all of the client types, and that would obviously cause gross profit overall to go up. So of course you could, if it's only gone up in a couple, or even if it has gone up in all three, you could actually put those numbers in here. So rather than pulling them all out individually and saying, retail gross profit's gone up with a margin increase of this, because, and then a context point, commercial's gone up, because, margin, reason. So, number, reason, further insight, context point for each of them, which will take a lot of time. Instead, you could have your analysis by a client type and kind of like intertwine it here, because you can say there's been a gross profit increase, decrease in all client types, and in brackets you can mention what they are, and we kind of did that here. So the other things which would affect the gross profit margin, so as well as looking at cost of sales and their percentage of revenue, you can look at the gross profit margin for each of the client types to see which of those have gone up. If revenue mix has moved towards higher margin clients, so in this case bespoke, which is a higher margin, or towards lower margin commercial, then that would cause it to go up if it's moved towards bespoke. So we can see here that more of business activity, so revenue, is for bespoke. Bespoke is higher margin, so that would improve the gross profit margin, because of the total revenue, bespoke accounts for more of total revenue now, and it's higher margin. And commercial accounts for less, and that's lower margin. So that's a reason why the gross profit margin will have gone up in the current year. And you could also look at the mix by product type as well, because we know that 100% wool and rugs are higher margin, higher margin and higher markup. So again, if revenue mix has moved towards these two, which actually it hasn't for wool, but it has for rugs, and kind of overall revenue has moved towards these two higher margin products, then that would of course cause a gross profit increase as well. So you look at the impact revenue mix has had by client type, but also by product as well. And of course, you could mention that there is operating gearing, so fixed costs won't go move in line with volume. So again, as I've just explained, because there's fixed costs there in production, then those costs will stay the same, whereas revenue's gone up, and of course that's going to improve the profit margin. Revenue's going up, costs are staying flat. Obviously, more profit as a percentage of revenue. And then context point it's continued its upward trend. So there's quite a lot of factors here that affect the gross profit margin. It's really important that you understand them. You understand what affects the gross profit margin. So we can then see this in the model answer, because actually most of those points were relevant here. So you can see that the gross profit margin went up, and that's because there was a gross profit margin increase in two of the client types. I've mentioned the number here for bespoke and commercial because they're the ones that have gone up. So you could say, a GPM increase in these two, despite a decline in retail, and have the numbers there, because then you can see you're not having too many points of your gross profit. You're not wasting too much time, but at the same time, you are actually still commenting on it by client type as well. So if you want to do it by client type, yes, the almost like traditional way, if you like, or the more kind of direct approach would be to take them all one by one and say why they've gone up or down. But yeah, it's quite a lot to do in that time. So therefore, you could kind of like intertwine it into here, similar to what we did when we looked at bespoke, and then we brought in some of the product types into that there. So that was a reason, because of a gross profit margin increase in those two client types. Revenue mix had moved more towards higher margin bespoke work and towards these higher margin products, so rugs. And then there's a point about fixed costs. So you can see, maybe I could have mentioned that point about cost of sales in here, and then just had a kind of like 4 points there for gross profit, although I guess those two kind of do tie together. And then that left us with room for a couple of points on operating profit. So you could have done admin, or you could have done selling and distribution. There wasn't any reasons given in here why they had gone up or down. So it was difficult to kind of choose on that basis. If there was, then I would have picked the one from the exam paper. that we were given a reason for. The numbers, hadn't really changed that much. I mean, selling and distribution had gone down a bit. I guess you could say if there's been more sales to commercial, that might have caused it to go down, possibly. I think admin's quite interesting because of the bonus. So yeah, I don't think it would have mattered too much which one you commented on there. But then obviously do operating profit. So, operating profit is a number we were asked for. You could have just done operating profit. I think there wasn't that much to say about the individual lines, but it's gone up or down with the number, profit margin, increase or decrease. And then you could give a reason there. And that's because admin and distribution were both decreasing as a percentage of revenue, and operating profit margin continues its upward trend as well. So it's definitely kind of been a good year here for business. And we can see here, we've done exactly the same thing. So we did overall cost of sales, which we've picked up there. I mean, as I've said before, can be in the appendix as well. So overall cost of sales, and then we did look at it as a percentage of revenue. So we compared cost of sales to revenue. And then so that was our first point that we had here. And then we went through materials and we went through labor. So we said like materials, this is the number. So it's gone up or down. The reason due to the price increase, could have said it gone up by more than revenue. I think we did that as well, didn't we? We said materials have gone up. Here's the reason. They're this percentage of revenue. So we've got that in there. And then a context point as well. Did some of these make it onto the marking key? No, they didn't. But again, so number, reason, this was kind of our further insight point. Then we had a context point, which wasn't there. And then labor, we did labor. We said labor had gone up. Reason, it didn't mention the pay rise on a marking key, surprisingly, but it did say, mention the point about fixed costs and operating gearing, which we mentioned. So that was good. And then we did gross profit, or both overall and the margin. So you only needed one of those, but I think it's good to look at both. So gross profit, and then we said the KPI had been achieved. Again, a bit disappointing that we've got a few backslashes here because we've mentioned a bonus and we talked about the impact of revenue mix as well. So perhaps a little bit frustrating there. But also in our analysis, we did mention as well that the commercial gross profit margin and the bespoke gross profit margin as well. So we picked up those. And then we've done operating profit, number and margin. And we mentioned is on an upward trend, and also the efficiencies, because it doesn't have to be word for word. And we mentioned in here that I think due to admin and distribution decreasing as a percentage of revenue, he's kind of saying efficiencies. I think they'd give that mark there, but even still, we've got the upward trend point. Could have mentioned about the impact of the PP pilot as well, because that's expected to have a loss. In fact, we did mention that, didn't we? We actually mentioned that in our revenue section. So even if you mention a point in a different section, you'll still get the mark for it. It's only conclusions and recommendations which need to be under a specific heading. So you can see, like I said, we could have gone on and you could have done, in fact, I think I did do admin. Yeah, I did do admin as well. So admin, and then I mentioned the staff bonus as well. And you can see, actually, I was going to say, that was enough. And you can actually see that didn't get me any more marks. So I was already at 4. So, doing this, even though it's correct, didn't get me any more marks. Without that, still got clearly competent. So actually having that in there didn't get me any more marks. But I guess it is good if you've got an extra point. At least it kind of gives you some headroom in case I made like a typo mistake or something and did like 32.8% on commercial gross profit margin rather than 23.8 typing in a rush. So, having an extra one isn't too bad, but, we don't want to spend too long having lots of extra points because, we need to make sure that we get through the whole requirement. And of course, we can see we've got all of these points in the appendix. So mix, analysis by client type, analysis of bespoke, cost of sales and distribution and admin was all in there as well. So you can see actually having a really thorough analysis of the financial statements, puts you in a position where you've pretty much passed the requirement. So we can see here that we've got clearly competent in these 6 boxes here, conclusions and recommendations, aren't too difficult. So, we should do really well here currently on this at the moment, but haven't done that last section. So passing the request for advice, isn't, essential, or doing really well here isn't essential. We definitely 100% need to attempt it. You should not admit it, but don't feel kind of too pressured going into it. Like, I really need to get this absolutely correct, or I'm going to fail the whole exam. In fact, that approach is quite dangerous, because what you don't want to do is spend an awfully long amount of time here, and then have a knock-on effect later on. So definitely want to attempt it. It can be quite difficult. It can be, it's obviously quite unpredictable. So make sure you attempt it. Have a good go at it, but you don't need to go into it thinking you absolutely need to get this correct. So it's actually quite small here. So we've got board meeting was held on the 26th of October 22 to discuss the draft management accounts. The CEO opened a meeting by stating it had been a good year with a strong revenue and profit increase. So yeah, certainly would agree with that. That has been the case. As a result, staff and director bonuses would be paid, and we'd already picked that out. Of course, we've got the management accounts. When we looked at admin, of course, we could see that the bonus had been paid. However, concerns were raised about the overdraft position. Several board members questioned why the company was overdrawn after such a strong performance. So, as we thought, there is something kind of cash related here. Please advise us on the reasons why cash has declined when profit has increased, the potential implications for the business, the actions that should be taken to improve the situation. So we've got some clear kind of structure here. Reasons why cash has declined when profit has increased, the potential implications for the business, and recommendations. So we're usually asked for recommendations. So it's really important that you have a recommendations heading with some recommendations under it. You could have it with all of your other recommendations at the end, but personally, I like to have them here because as I go through it, I'll calculate any numbers I've been asked for, and then some points about the significance, the impacts on the business, on the accounts, on the KPIs, and any possible bias in the information. It doesn't look as though that's going to be an issue here. We're just doing it effectively a bit more analysis of the accounts. So we always want to make sure we're answering, the question as we've been doing kind of throughout. So I'm saying, focus on the requirement, what it's asked for, revenue, gross profit, by client type, by product type. So here we've been asked for reasons why cash has declined, implications on the business, and recommendations. So I probably have those as headings just to keep me kind of really focused. So obviously it's drawing us to the cash position, and there's a lot mentioned in the AI about cash. That doesn't necessarily mean it will come up. This certainly isn't the first case study where there's been a lot about cash in the AI, and in all of those instances, it didn't come up in the exam, but it is really important. Obviously, cash flow is crucial to a business, so it's really important that we kind of understand the working capital position in particular for this business. So we can see here that cash is zero there as an asset, and it's overdrawn because we can see the liability here. So they are back in the overdraft, and what's quite good is we get the cash flow statement, which we can see here. So a nice healthy profit before tax, few adjustments for non-cash items like depreciation. Finance costs, of course, is just taken off further down. So nice kind of healthy operating profit before working capital. And then you can see that the working capital changes just completely deplete the cash balance. So you can see that inventories must have gone up, receivables have gone up, and payables must have gone down. So all of the working capital balances have had an adverse impact on cash, and they've kind of completely depleted cash. Then we've got tax paid, which of course is mandatory. There's nothing to say there about tax. We can see capital expenditure still looks quite low. Obviously, the finance cost, which does look quite high, but of course you'll see that in the P&L as well. So they must have incurred some interest on what would have been an overdraft balance. The dividend was still paid, and you can see that's caused like a decrease in cash, and that's what's caused the overdraft balance. So really kind of looking here at these working capital movements. So we can, of course, look at the numbers and compare them to the previous year. So again, in terms of this one-off piece of analysis, it is almost a little bit like some additional analysis in the management accounts. And of course, you could be asked to analyze cash. It could be revenue, gross profit, and cash, perhaps. So I guess this isn't too different to if that were the case. So of course, you could look at the cash balance as what it was at the previous year compared to what it is. We've got the prior year numbers, and we've got inventory between the different types in the production process. Receivables, payables, and obviously the calculation of days there. So, we could have our prior year numbers, and then of course, if we, look at the movement, of course, if you look at the, movement in inventory, you're going to get to the number that's in the cash flow statement because inventories have gone up. As we've seen, receivables have gone up, payables have gone down. But interestingly, we can look at days, and we can see that, inventory days have gone up, receivables days, have gone up, and payables days have gone down. And of course, we've got reasons from this in the scenario. We know that inventories went up. We know they got depleted at the end of the previous year, but then they went back up. And we also know that there were several bespoke clients where the work hadn't been completed and it was still ongoing. So maybe they're holding some work in progress for that. And you can actually see that it's the work in progress which has gone up the most. Raw materials have gone up quite a bit as well. Some of that will be in anticipation for quarter one. And if the previous quarter one was the busiest ever, maybe they're expecting the same for this quarter one, although we are told that demand gradually slowed throughout the year. So actually maybe demand is slowing and therefore, sales are decreasing. We can't actually see the trend of sales across the quarters. But if they are slowing, then of course that would result in inventory becoming slower to move. And then we've got the bespoke work as well, which could be causing a build-up in inventories too. So again, we've got some reasons there why inventories would be going up. Receivables as well, they're going up. Again, with that bespoke work, we were told that paying 90 days after installation. So it's probably some kind of accrued income there, as well as possible trade receivables. And you can see accrued income's gone up quite a lot if they've been doing work on the contract, but they haven't actually finished it yet. So trade days have gone up and payables have gone down, of course, because we were told that the supplier said that they had to reduce payment terms. So we can pick those out as the reasons why cash has kind of gone down. So you could start off by saying what the cash balance was. And of course, there's a KPI for cash as well, don't forget. So that's good to mention that in there as well. Obviously, that hasn't been met because they haven't generated positive cash flow. And of course, we know from the AI what the overdraft limit is. You might be told it as well in the exam paper. So you could possibly look there to see if there is a change. Might be a bit of a sneaky change if they just put that in without mentioning it, but you do have it there. Of course, it's variable interest as well, so that's a risk. But then actually kind of quite similar to what we did with our revenue and cost analysis. We could just say, receivables have gone up, receivables days are this, and then the reason, extended credit terms from 2 bespoke clients. Payables down, payables days down, due to supplier reducing credit terms. Inventory's up, inventory days up, due to the WIP building and in anticipation of Q1 sales and the bespoke products. So actually, if you're asked for the reasons why things have gone up or down, that's kind of what we were doing above. So that isn't too different there. And like I said, you could be asked to analyze cash as part of the first part to the requirement. You could be revenue, gross profit, and cash, for example. So then the implications for the business, okay, well, if they're clearly low on cash and they've gone into the overdraft, well, the obvious impact there, of course, is the interest expense. We've obviously seen that has gone up. So they incur interest. We know it's variable interest as well. So if rates were to change, that would cause interest to go up. That's a point there. Could even possibly be penalties if they exceed the overdraft limit. They haven't exceeded it yet, but they're kind of getting quite close. And also, if this kind of continues and we can kind of see what's happened here, there's insufficient cash to invest in PPE. Now, we don't know whether they needed to invest more in PPE, and we weren't told, but there's been substantial investments in the past. We're told that they need to continue to invest to improve like process innovation. So actually, there won't be sufficient cash to do that, and this isn't effectively sustainable at the moment. So there'd be insufficient cash to invest in PPE. You could have mentioned some other points as well. Maybe about the dividend. Maybe a dividend should have been considered whether that should be not be paid. So in terms of recommendations, then better payment terms, obviously with customers, better payment terms with suppliers, or find an alternative supplier. Remember, they're heavily dependent on the distributor and Eaton as the supplier of the materials. So again, finding an alternative supplier or alternative distributor, not in this case, but in this case, the supplier, Eaton, is a good recommendation to suggest. A good one is maybe linking directors' bonus to cash. Remember, it's all based on kind of like revenue and profit, not on cash. So that might give directors an incentive to maybe negotiate payment terms better. And a good recommendation, which is just arrange some long-term finance. This is a healthy, profitable business. It's just that the way that they're trading with customers, like Bespoke customers that are having longer payment terms, the business is growing. It just needs some investment in working capital. You can see they haven't got any debt, on the SFP. So they've just arranged like a long-term finance loan, fixed interest, probably be much lower than the rate they're getting on like an unsecured overdraft. And then it will give them the cash balance they need to support that working capital, but they're trading profitably. They just need a bit better management there in terms of getting some liquidity into the business, and a long-term loan would be a good way to do that, and there wouldn't be any issue getting that loan. You think with all this PPE security, healthy, profitable business, and other existing debt. So that would kind of solve the issue really. So that's how to do with a one-off piece of analysis, and you can see pick up enough marks here. But like I said, if you didn't get enough points, even if you've got like 2 or 3 and you were struggling with time a bit, what's important is to kind of get a few points down, particularly if you've done well here, try to get kind of at least kind of 3 or 4, just so you can get a couple of reasons, an implication and a couple of recommendations. But what's important is you finish on time so that you can do your conclusions, recommendations, and exec summary for requirement 1. That's really important because, of course, you need to pass the exec summary in isolation. So you don't want to overrun on requirement 1 and not be able to do your exec summary properly and then have less time on requirement 2 or 3. So don't kind of sacrifice those for this, for the request for advice. Do what you can within the time. Most important thing is to stick to time so you don't have a knock-on impact on requirement 2 or 3. Requirement 1 is probably the easiest to pass, and you can actually see going into this, I already passed because I was going to do well here. I'm going to get a few points here, and then I'm going to get clearly competent here, and at least a sufficiently competent here. So I'm going to pass requirement 1. I'm not going to fail the exam on this. I'll just get a few points down, and that's all I need because I've done so well on the other bits. But if you spend too much time here trying to get these higher marks and you don't have enough time, you will fail on requirement 2 and 3. Probably requirement 3. So get what you can down. The points aren't too difficult. It'll be a mixture of things that were asked for, so the reasons why it's gone up or down, implications on the business, interest, finance cost, and then some recommendations. So points weren't too difficult, but as I keep saying lots of times, make sure you finish it on time. So then when you come to your conclusions, what we need to do here on the conclusions is just to make sure that we've got a point on everything we've been asked for. So I like to flip back to the requirement wording and just make sure that I've covered everything off. Revenue, we've got it by client type. we've got it by product type, and we've got it in total, gross profit by client type, and in total, operating profit and the request for advice. And actually we use the requirement wording to structure our report. So of course we've got that because I use that requirement wording to drive my headings: revenue, gross profit, operating profit, cash. Though I've got those 4 things they've asked for, as my headings, and I need to make sure I've got a conclusion on each of them. So of course, because my sections are based on the requirement wording, then all I need to do is just kind of take the main points from each section into the conclusions. So we want to keep our conclusions. We don't want them to be too long because we'll use them as the basis for the exec summary, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But we want to be thorough. So if they've asked for, revenue overall, and they also want it by, client type, then we need to have a point for each client type. Now, we're not going to, of course, copy our whole revenue section into our conclusions because we're just repeating our revenue section. What we instead want to do is just take the main point. So we could take the main point from overall revenue. So we could take this. So just like the main number with a brief comment. So we don't need to copy all of our analysis, just the number with the main point. Then with retail, the same. So again, just a number and the reason. So commercial, because they wanted it by client type, we're going to need a point on each kind of client type in the conclusions. So again, we could just have bespoke. So you can see you can just take the main point from each section, and then we should probably have this point in as well, because then we've got some information by product type as well. So you could maybe bring a bit more in for bespoke, because then we can have it by maybe just this bit. So then we've got the numbers by product type in there as well. And then with PP as well, that's another product we could have in there as well. So you can see we just take these points down into our conclusion. So we've got a conclusion on overall revenue by client type and by product, like the examiners have asked for in the requirement. But we don't need all the detail we had, otherwise it's not a conclusion, it's just a complete repetition. And then with gross profit as well, you could just bring in the overall gross profit number and the gross profit margin. You can see I haven't copied in over my whole gross profit section. I just brought in the headline number for the conclusion. That's where you want the headline number. So the gross profit and then the increase in the gross profit margin as well. And maybe with that points that we had about it by client type as well. So we've got it by client type in there as well. And then again with operating profit, just the operating profit, just kind of number, and maybe with the margin. And then 1 or 2 of the points on cash, I'd probably have like the headline number again. So the cash number's gone down, it's overdrawn, and then maybe one of the reasons why. So then we could have our recommendations for the requirement as a whole. We've already had some recommendations. We've already included some recommendations, don't forget. We had our recommendations for the one-off issue. So this was all to do with that issue about cash. So like I said, I like having them here because as I go through it and I've said, why has cash gone down? What are the implications? And then I just put the recommendations here. But you can, if you prefer, have them all here at the end. People do it that way. Yeah, it's absolutely fine to do that. Again, it's just one of those which is personal preference. But don't forget, those recommendations are in this box here. You've then got your like normal commercial recommendations, your recommendations on everything else, not related to the one-off issue. So again, we could think of a few recommendations for requirement 1, like almost in advance. Like it would be good to have like profit analysis by individual product. We don't have that, do we? We can do profit analysis by client type, but not by product. So it'd be good to have that. So that's a good recommendation to have. I definitely have that. Profit analysis by product, by retailer, by client, and contracts. We don't have it like all the individual retailers, all of the commercial clients, all of the bespoke contracts, and do a fuller profit analysis. Well, we'd like to have that in an ideal world, but obviously we don't really want that in the exam because we'd be overwhelmed. But that's what you would ideally have if you were doing a proper analysis of this business. Another good recommendation is to focus on a particular client or product type. So the one which is growing, or investigate ones which are declining. So which client type is doing well, bespoke, which one wasn't doing as well, Well, they all kind of went up in the year, so they're all kind of doing well. But of course, PP was below the forecast. So, win more high margin bespoke, investigate why PP didn't meet the forecast. And then we could suggest some other recommendations. So start manufacturing for PP. That's probably what we're going to be looking at in a requirement 2 or requirement 3. Reduce operating gearing in anticipation of a downturn. Develop a circular business model. Find alternative suppliers for yarn, for PP and distribution. In all of those, they're relying on a single supplier. Hedge the risk of wool price increases, possibly. I mean, hard to hedge it over the long term, but in the short term, you could use some derivatives to do that. Optimize delivery routes and minimize cost. And we've mentioned some of these ones around cash already. We've mentioned some of these in our recommendations for cash. So we can see here, probably just focus on the most relevant recommendations there. But you always get one for your own recommendation. There'll usually be one for doing further analysis, so gross profit by product type in this case. Winning more bespoke work, so focusing on the growing area. I think there'll be something in here about suggesting to manufacture PP. Maybe something about sustainability, but you can see there you'd get enough for the recommendations. So, as you've said, with the conclusions, I've got the number and a brief comment with each point. So you can see actually to pass the conclusions box, that's very straightforward here. Passing that isn't difficult. You can see that we've got it. So to pass the conclusions box, you can see that we've got it. Comment total revenue, comment on revenue by client or product type, which we had. So we answered the question, overall revenue by client and product type, gross profit and operating profit and cash. So that is a very easy one to pass. Now, when we come to our exec summary, of course, you think we've just concluded, and this is what we said in our conclusions, we've concluded and given a conclusion on the year. And of course, if we're concluding on the performance of revenue, gross profit, operating profit, and the cash issue, then of course we'll be saying what the numbers have changed by and a reason why they've gone up or down. So, and looking at those kind of overall headline numbers, that's a conclusion. They're the main points from our analysis. So now we need to do a summary. So if you're doing a summary of the performance of the year, it's going to be the same. We're summarizing exactly the same thing we concluded on. What's the difference between a conclusion and a summary? There isn't much of a difference, between the two. We've concluded on what's happened in the year. So, revenue's gone up. It's still below the target. Gross profit has gone up. The margin has improved because revenue mix has moved towards bespoke. Operating profit has gone up because there were the efficiencies there with admin and distribution, and cash has gone down because of the changes in working capital. That's what happened in the year. So when we conclude on that, that's what we say. If we're now going to go and summarize what's happened in the year, it's the same, because what happened in the year is kind of factual. That's what happened. So whether you conclude on it or whether you summarize it, you're going to have the same points. And if you look at the marking key for the exec summary, and you look at that top box and compare it to the conclusions, you'll see they're the same points, which, as I've said, makes sense, because if you conclude on something, and if you're concluding on the same thing and summarizing on the same thing, then of course you're going to have, the same points in there, because you're looking at the same subject matter. So therefore, as a starting point for your exec summary, you can copy over your conclusion. So you've got those main points in there. You've got those main factual points. You've got that key subject matter in there. Revenue has gone up by this, with the brief reason, retail, commercial, all of the individual client types have gone up. gross profit's gone up by this, operating profit's gone up by this, cash has gone down by this. So we can see here that most of the exec summary will be the same as the conclusions. However, there is more to do in the exec summary, and this is where we need to show skills here. This is where what really kind of sets us apart from just copying over the conclusions, which is not sufficient and is not something you should just do. What you need to do is you can do that as a starting point, so you've got the numbers in there as a starting point. What you then need to do is include some additional points and focus on points which are the most important to directors. Now, you might think to yourself, well, I could just bring in lots and lots of different points. Well, there's a limit to how many points you can bring in because it has to be an appropriate summary. You can't make it too long, otherwise it wouldn't be a summary. So therefore, you can bring in some additional points, and you get these points just from having the main numbers in there, which have come from your conclusions. But there'll be some additional points as well that you need to bring into the exec summary to get those marks. Now, when you're thinking about, well, what type of points should I include? Well, remember, in our conclusions, we had like the number, so like the headline number and the reason why each of them had gone up or down. So why revenue had gone up or down, gross profit had gone up or down, etc. What we didn't have was any of these almost like advanced points, if you like, the thinking of further insight points, those applying judgment points, where we were giving very detailed reasons why the gross profit margin had moved, so revenue mix, impacts, or kind of reasons maybe why that operating profit had moved, or maybe some further insight on the cash. So we could bring some of those points into our exec summary, maybe a bit more further analysis on bespoke revenue. So what we'll do as a starting point is you can bring your conclusions over to begin with, but you need to add kind of somewhere between kind of 3 and 5 additional points. So I'd focus on the things which are most important to the directors. You think the board of directors, they're interested in like the big picture for the business. So they're interested in which kind of revenue streams are growing significantly, and therefore they should focus on which one, or conversely, which ones are declining, and therefore they should be particularly concerned about. Significant movements in cash, which is certainly something that's happened. Significant changes in profit margin. What they're probably not interested in is, labour costs have gone up by 1.8% due to a 1.5% pay rise. But that isn't really any particularly interesting analysis. It isn't like the biggest cost, and it isn't a significant increase. What they will be very interested in is any further analysis we have, perhaps about bespoke work, things which are adversely impacting cash. We could add some more on that, because we know that in our conclusions, we had a single point, on cash. We said that cash is overdrawn. So cash has decreased. It's an overdrawn balance. The KPI hasn't been met. We had a brief reason there saying receivables, but then that was in our conclusion. So that's in our exec summary to begin with. But then we could add in some further analysis. So points like interest is payable. So the implications on the business, interest is payable and the interest rate is variable. So it could go up even more. There could also be penalties as well. And there's insufficient cash to invest in PPE. So these are all things, this is a big picture issue for the directors, because this is saying you're not going to have enough to invest in PPE. You're going to incur more finance costs as well because of this cash position. So you can see in the conclusions, we just had briefly what the number was, the cash number, and a brief reason why it had changed. But then in the exec summary, we've added in some additional points, some of the implications on the business. We've added in some more points there. Now we know, of course, in our gross profit, we just had the gross profit and said the number had gone up or down and a brief reason why, but we've added more to the exec summary, because that's again something else the directors are interested in. Cash is so important to all businesses. Like liquidity is a big picture issue. There has been a significant change. There's been an improvement in the profit margin. You know, a significant change doesn't have to be like a negative thing. It's been improvement in the gross profit margin. So we've added a bit more there to the exec summary. In the conclusions, we just said, oh, the gross profit margin's gone up by this to this because there's been an improvement in a couple of the client types. But then we could add in some of those additional points we had in the main body of our report, like the revenue mix shift towards more high margin bespoke work and high margin rugs. And of course, because of the fixed cost not moving in line with volume, and gross profit margin is on an upward trend. So it doesn't always have to be bad news. We're just focusing on those kind of big pictures, like gross profit margins that overall are going up, and these are the reasons why. Cash is going down. This is the reasons why and the impact on the business. So we're adding more to those big issues. You know, like I said, I've added in a point on cost of sales. I've added it in on materials because that's the big cost, the main cost. And your only supplier is putting the prices up. And one of our recommendations, further below was to find another supplier. So then we've added in some additional points on those rather than adding in labor costs, which was a small cost, insignificant movement. So hopefully you can see what I mean by adding in those, the most significant additional points. So focusing on profit margins, cash, the additional issue, which in this case was cash. If there's ethics in requirement 1, then have one ethics issue in the conclusion and add an extra one into the exec summary. And then bring in like 4 of your recommendations, making sure you've got at least one on the additional analysis, in this case cash, and one on ethics if ethics is in requirement 1, which it tends not to be, but it can be. So then with the recommendations, I wouldn't just pick any old recommendations. Pick the ones which you feel are the most important. I definitely have 1 or 2. I'd probably take 2 from here and then 2 from here. So it is a bit of a judgment, and it is a bit difficult to kind of decide sometimes, what the most important ones are. But clearly the cash was kind of a big issue. So, arranging longer term finance was a good recommendation, I thought. Better payment terms with customers. I mean, you could have backslashed that as well with suppliers as well. And then focus on that high margin bespoke work because that's driving the profit margin. You can see here profit margins are going up because bespoke margin's gone up and revenue mix is moving towards it. So kind of keep that trend going. And you can investigate why PP didn't meet the forecast as well. And then you can kind of see that gives you kind of a good shot at getting these other points. Actually, the point on cash was given them out there. And then you can actually see here, these in this instance were all recommendations. So actually, whilst I said include these additional points, you can actually see that the points that were given marks were all recommendations, and that has been the case. But on other times, it has been picking out like the most important additional points as well and giving some further analysis on those key movements. It could be that, but then we've got our recommendations as well. Can be quite difficult to get, but you can see that we have picked up kind of one of those, and that's enough there to kind of get us through. But I think you should be able to get all of these in the exec summary, and then be able to pick up a couple of passes in these 2 boxes. But it is difficult. It is very difficult to kind of get these points. It's not easy. So really important you get this one and you keep it as an appropriate summary. So some people have suggested, why don't I just copy loads and loads of points from my requirement 1 and I've got more chance of getting these points. Well, if you do that, you'll lose this point. And also that's not in the spirit of the exam as well. And it's not professional. You wouldn't do that in a report. You wouldn't just kind of copy it all over again. This is a nice succinct summary. You've got all the main numbers for each section that's been asked for, with a specific focus on those most important points to the directors. And that's what you'd have in a summary of a report. That's what you'd have in the executive summary. Nothing which isn't in the report, but they've taken the report and pulled out the main points, the most important points. So this is a good executive summary because it's got all the main numbers, which of course are factual and therefore they are also in the conclusions as well. But then it's also focused on the main points and added a bit more depth to the exec summary that wasn't in the conclusion. So it's really focusing on those kind of main areas: cash, profit margin changes, and revenue of the most important streams, most important movements. So do that, and don't see it as a big kind of copy and paste exercise. In a game, it does require a skill. It does require you to exercise judgment and apply judgment when deciding which points to add in, to making sure you don't kind of add in too much, or it is quite a skill to the exec summary. I do appreciate that it is quite difficult and lots of people struggle with it, but hopefully that kind of gives you a clear idea of how to do it and how you should approach it. And then with your recommendations as well, if they are more focused on recommendations, then kind of hopefully you'll pick those up if you've thought about some good recommendations based on what has gone on in the year. And that's what I've done here with the recommendations. Focus on channels which have performed well in the year, investigate ones which have performed poorly. Reducing operating gearing if there is going to be a downturn is a good one to suggest. And we had lots of good recommendations here with the one-off piece of analysis. So bringing those in should help you pick up those marks. So overall, I think, fairly standard requirement one. I mean, most requirement ones are in this format. And so, this exam technique will stand you in good stead to doing well on a requirement one. So really important you have a good technique so you can work through it quickly, efficiently, but also thoroughly to making sure you're passing comfortably on the boxes on the main pieces of analysis. Do the best you can on this request for advice, thorough conclusions, because that forms the basis of the exec summary, and then adding in those additional points onto your exec summary. And like I've said several times, really, really important that you focus on exactly what the requirement has asked you for, and you deliver exactly what the examiners have asked for, not the requirement you may have hoped or may have expected to come up. And absolutely essential that you stick to time, you finish on time, so that you have sufficient time for requirement 2 and requirement 3. We'll be seeing plenty more requirement 1s in the later mock exam debrief videos, and you have plenty more time to practice requirement 1s in the other mock exams to work on those areas where you need improvement. But hopefully by having gone through my model answer and the marking key, but particularly my model answer, you can see exactly where you did well, but also where you didn't do as well, and where you need to improve, and how you're going to be able to do that going forward, so you can produce an answer which will ensure more similar to this, and therefore ensuring that you get a good pass and ideally a clearly competent in every box for requirement 1, but not essential and not something you should sacrifice time for. So you should be able to identify the areas you need to improve after this, and you'll be able to implement that in the other mock exams.